The hum of the airplane engines was steady and low, the kind of sound that blended into the background after a few minutes. Passengers were still settling in, adjusting air vents, pushing small bags under the seats, and scrolling through their phones before takeoff. The cabin smelled faintly of coffee and that clean, recycled air that every plane seemed to have. In seat 12F by the window, a woman sat quietly. She had boarded with no rush, moving with a calm that made her almost invisible. Her ticket said Anna Fields. She didn't stand out, not even a little. Mid-30s, tidy clothes, simple hairstyle. No jewelry, no heavy perfume. She had the kind of face that was easy to forget, and that was exactly how she liked it. She looked out the window as the plane began to taxi. The early morning light caught the metal of the wings, turning them silver and sharp. Around her, people were already slipping into the rhythm of travel. One man beside her was pulling up a movie. Another passenger was asleep before the wheels even left the ground. Anna, if that was her real name, just sat still. Her eyes followed the runway lines until they blurred, and the force of takeoff pressed her gently back into her seat. The familiar lift, the slight vibration, the city shrinking below. She didn't smile, but she didn't look nervous either. It was more like she was trying to disappear into the noise. She had no luggage in the overhead compartment, only a small carry-on under the seat. Inside it were a few essentials: a passport, a phone with no SIM card, and a sealed envelope. She'd checked it 3 times before boarding. The seal was still intact, the paper uncreased. The envelope had no name on the front, only a small red stamp that meant something to a very small number of people in the world. The flight attendants moved through the aisle, checking seatbelts and demonstrating safety instructions. Anna nodded along politely. When the drinks cart came around, she asked only for water. Her voice was soft, controlled. The attendant smiled and moved on without a second thought. For the first hour, everything was perfectly normal. The cabin lights dimmed slightly. A few people lowered their window shades, and the gentle hum of conversation faded into a comfortable quiet. The captain made a short announcement. Good weather, clear skies, estimated flight time of 7 hours. Nothing unusual. But in the cockpit, a small light on the communication panel blinked. It wasn't the kind of alert that called for alarm, but it wasn't routine either. The co-pilot leaned forward, frowning slightly. He tapped the screen and read the incoming message from air traffic control. Code request verification for passenger manifest, it said. He looked over at the captain. You expecting that? The captain shook his head. Not for a transatlantic passenger flight. They usually only do that for cargo or diplomatic clearance. Maybe someone on board with a restricted visa? Could be. Let's just confirm. The captain keyed in a response requesting clarification. The reply came almost instantly. Short, direct, and strange. Verify ID for passenger in seat 12F. Maintain current heading. Await further instruction. The captain looked back at his co-pilot. 12F? The co-pilot pulled up the manifest and scrolled down the list. Anna Fields, American, booked last night through a government clearance channel. The captain frowned. You ever seen that happen? Not for an economy seat, the co-pilot said quietly. Neither of them said anything else for a moment. They just exchanged a look that said this isn't normal. But there was nothing else to do. The plane continued on its route, steady and calm, gliding over the Atlantic. Back in the cabin, Anna noticed the faint change in engine tone as the pilots adjusted their altitude. She didn't look up, but her hand brushed against the envelope in her bag, as if checking that it was still there. Her breathing stayed even. She knew what was happening, or at least, she had expected it might happen. It had been months of moving quietly, changing names, changing routes, keeping her face out of cameras. There was a reason she had booked this flight at the last minute. Civilian routes were safer. Government channels were easier to track, but even the safest plan has cracks. A baby cried somewhere near the back of the plane. A man laughed softly at a movie. Everything around her felt perfectly normal, but Anna's mind was running through calculations. Time, distance, altitude, potential interception points. If they had found her, it meant she had run out of time. In the cockpit, another message appeared. This one was different. Maintain current altitude. You are now under NORAD escort. Do not alarm passengers. The captain stared at the words for a second. NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command. They only contacted civilian pilots for one reason. Military coordination. He keyed the radio. Control confirm NORAD escort? Civilian aircraft here, no distress, all systems nominal. The reply was clear and immediate. Confirmed. 2 F-22s en route to meet you at your current coordinates. Maintain altitude. Repeat. Maintain altitude. The captain turned slowly toward his co-pilot. They're sending Raptors for a passenger flight? That's what it says. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then the captain sighed, rubbing his temple. All right. Let's just follow procedure. No announcements. No panic. Down in the cabin, no one noticed a thing. The movie screens flickered. The attendant smiled. The world went on as if nothing was happening. Only one person, in seat 12F, felt the subtle shift in pressure that told her the plane was no longer alone. Anna looked out of her window and caught a glimpse of something, a faint glint of silver far out in the blue. For a heartbeat, she thought it was her imagination, but then another shape appeared, sleek and fast, cutting through the air far below the wing. 2 fighter jets. Her eyes didn't widen, but her fingers tightened slightly around the armrest. So it was happening. They had found her. She didn't move. She didn't say anything. To anyone else, she was just another tired traveler watching the clouds. But inside, she was rehearsing every possible next step. What would they do? Would they force a landing? Intercept. The attendant passed by again, smiling. Everything okay, ma'am? Anna nodded. Yes, thank you. Her voice was calm, completely normal. The attendant moved on without noticing the tremor she was trying to hide. In the cockpit, the pilots could now see the F-22s clearly on radar. 2 blips, steady and fast, holding formation on either side. Then a voice crackled over the secure channel. Firm, professional, and unmistakably military. This is Eagle 1. Civilian Flight 78. You are under NORAD observation. Maintain heading. No course deviation. Confirm awareness, the captain replied. Bot on Flight 78 confirmed. Maintaining heading. Copy that, the voice said. Stand by for further instruction. Then silence. The captain looked out through the windshield, spotting faint streaks of light in the distance. The fighters were there, flying just out of visual range. Back in the cabin, Anna glanced at her watch. Still 4 hours to Washington. She exhaled slowly. 4 hours to deliver what she was carrying, if they let her land. She reached into her bag just to feel the edge of the envelope again. Sealed. Safe. That envelope was the reason she was here. The reason the F-22s were out there. A flight attendant's voice came over the intercom, cheerful and unaware. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be serving lunch shortly. If you'd like to stretch your legs, please feel free to do so while the seatbelt sign is off. Passengers stirred. Someone laughed. The mood was light, and in the middle of it all, Anna sat perfectly still in seat 12F, eyes fixed on the clouds outside. She had trained herself to stay invisible, but invisibility was no longer an option. The captain made one more private transmission. Control, we've confirmed escort visual. Request reason for NORAD involvement. The response came after a long pause. Passenger of interest aboard. Clearance Alpha. Maintain course. Do not engage. The captain looked at the co-pilot. Clearance Alpha? That's above our pay grade. Way above, the co-pilot muttered. The captain shook his head. Who the hell is in 12F? Anna closed her eyes for a moment, trying to calm the pounding in her chest. The quiet of the cabin felt heavy now. The faint rumble of the engines was her only anchor. She thought about the months that led to this, the people she couldn't contact, the files she had erased, the cities she had crossed under different names. Every false identity had been a layer of protection. Until this one cracked. She looked out the window again. The clouds stretched endless and white, the sun bright against the wing. From here, the world looked peaceful. No one could see the tension playing out thousands of feet above them. In another part of the sky, 2 pilots in helmets glanced at their targeting systems. Their screens confirmed the same thing. Passenger 12F, civilian identity verified. Await instruction. But instructions hadn't come yet. Anna leaned her head back against the seat, her face calm again. If this was the end of her run, she would face it quietly. She had done her part. And if she was lucky, the message would still reach where it needed to go. The seatbelt sign blinked off. A child laughed nearby. A woman in the next row took a photo of the clouds. No one on that flight could have guessed that the woman, sitting quietly in 12F, was the reason 2 fighter jets now shadowed them through the upper atmosphere. To everyone else, she was just another passenger. To the sky above, she was the center of a mission that had just begun. The air inside the cabin felt calm, but above the clouds, something far from ordinary was taking shape. The passengers were lost in their movies, books, and naps. Nobody paid much attention to the subtle changes, the captain's tighter voice, the slight shifts in altitude. But if anyone had looked out of the right window, they might have seen two faint dots moving beside them, steady and silent. In seat 12F, Anna sat with her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her face showed nothing, but her heartbeat told a different story. Every few minutes she took a quiet breath, long and steady, the way she'd been trained. Control your pulse, control your face. If the body stayed calm, the mind would follow. That's what she used to believe before everything had gone wrong. The captain's voice came over the intercom, smooth and cheerful. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We'll be cruising at 35,000 feet. The weather looks good, so please relax and enjoy the flight." He didn't mention that he had just received his fourth coded transmission from NORAD in less than an hour. He didn't say that two F-22s were flying guard on either side of the plane. He didn't say that one passenger had triggered a full military alert. He just said what passengers expected to hear. That was his job, keep the calm. Inside the cockpit, though, the calm was gone. The co-pilot stared at the message on his screen, reading it again even though he knew it by heart. Passenger 12F confirmed under protected alias. Maintain course. Prepare for secure handoff upon descent. He looked up. Protected alias, he said under his breath. What does that even mean for a civilian flight? The captain shook his head slowly. Means we don't ask questions. He adjusted his headset. But I'd sure like to know who we're carrying. The co-pilot gave a low whistle. If they've sent Raptors for her, she's not just a somebody. She's somebody important. Back in the cabin, Anna could feel the plane dip slightly, just enough to let her know they were in coordination mode. Her eyes flicked toward the window again, and for a second she saw it, the sleek gray wing of one of the fighter jets glinting in the sunlight. She didn't need to see the other one. There were always two. Her mind went back to the night before, the safe house in Prague, the small desk light, the decision that had changed everything. She had been gone for almost 2 years, off the grid, declared missing in a foreign operation gone wrong. To most people, she no longer existed. But last week, she'd found something she couldn't ignore. It was supposed to be a routine data recovery, a cleanup task from her old team. But buried inside the files was a series of coded transmissions, something that wasn't supposed to exist. The codes matched a defense project that had been shut down years ago, an automated satellite system with the power to override human commands. A system capable of mistaking a simulation for a real attack. Someone had brought it back online. She'd tried to send the information through her old channels, but none of them worked anymore. The contacts were gone, replaced, or erased. In the end, she had only one choice: go herself in person. The data she carried in that sealed envelope wasn't digital. It was old school, printed and encoded, impossible to intercept electronically. And it was meant for one person only, the Secretary of Defense. She had planned it carefully. The fake name, the last-minute booking, the quiet seat by the window. No electronics, no signal trail. But somehow they'd still found her. Anna's hand brushed over the envelope in her bag again. She thought about the risks. If they intercepted her before she landed, the data might never reach the right hands. If they saw her as a threat instead of a messenger, things could end very differently. She closed her eyes. Stay calm, stay ordinary. A flight attendant walked by, checking on passengers. She smiled at Anna. Would you like some tea or coffee? Just water, please. The attendant nodded. Of course. When she left, Anna stared out of the window again, letting her thoughts drift. She remembered her old life, before the disappearances, before the aliases. The offices full of screens, the quiet hum of servers, the sense that her work mattered. She had believed in what they were doing. But after her last mission collapsed and the files went dark, everything had changed. A voice came over the intercom again, but not for passengers this time. It was routed only to the cockpit. Control to Flight 78, confirm stable altitude. Request acknowledgement for passenger verification. The captain responded immediately. Confirmed stable. Passenger verification pending. There was a pause. Then the voice returned. We need visual confirmation of identity. Cabin crew to assist. Use discretion. The captain looked at his co-pilot. They want us to confirm her ID? Seems like it. The captain sighed, rubbing his temple. All right. I'll send one of the senior attendants. No need to alarm anyone. He pressed the call button and spoke quietly to the head flight attendant, a calm, capable woman who'd worked with him for years. I need you to check on passenger 12F, he said softly. Ask to see her passport. Tell her it's a routine verification. And stay calm whatever happens. The attendant hesitated. Is something wrong? Just follow the request, he said. And don't draw attention. She nodded and made her way down the aisle, her professional smile still in place. Anna saw her coming long before she reached her row. She could tell by the way the attendant tried to appear casual, by the slight change in her walk. She knew exactly what was about to happen. When the attendant stopped beside her, Anna looked up politely. Yes? Good afternoon, ma'am. Sorry to bother you, but we're doing a quick verification of travel documents for a few passengers. May I see your passport, please? Anna didn't blink. She reached into her bag slowly, carefully, and pulled out the small blue booklet. The attendant opened it, glanced at the name, Anna Fields, and the photo, which matched perfectly. The document was flawless. She had made sure of that. Thank you, the attendant said, smiling again. Everything's in order. Anna's voice was calm. Of course. Is everything all right? Just standard procedure, the attendant said before walking away. But the calmness in her tone didn't match the small flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Back in the cockpit, the confirmation came through the crew channel. Visual verification complete. Passenger ID matches manifest. For a few moments, everything seemed to settle again. The captain allowed himself a breath of relief. Maybe it's just some diplomatic clearance mess, he said quietly, but the next message shattered that thought. Passenger confirmed under NATO intelligence protection. Mission status classified. Maintain security. Priority landing to follow. The co-pilot read it twice. Did that say intelligence? The captain nodded slowly. Looks like we're carrying someone who wasn't supposed to be found. Anna could sense the shift in the air again. Not turbulence, energy. The kind that came when people realized something wasn't normal. She felt it in the way the attendants whispered to each other at the galley, in the way the captain's voice stayed off the speaker a little too long. She tried to focus on her breathing, but her mind kept circling back to the same question. Who had alerted them? The project files she'd uncovered were sealed under 3 separate clearance levels. Only a handful of people even knew what Project EOS meant. If someone had tipped them off, it meant someone close had turned. Outside, the sky stretched endlessly, brilliant and cold. The fighter jets kept their distance but never left their side. Every few minutes, one adjusted slightly, glinting in the sun before disappearing again. They were watching, waiting for orders. Anna knew what they were capable of. She had worked on systems that guided aircraft like those. The precision, the discipline, the quiet obedience to unseen commands. The sight of them should have made her feel safe. Instead, it felt like a warning. She leaned her head against the window and let her thoughts drift to the people she'd lost along the way. Teammates who had trusted the wrong channels. Officers who had vanished after missions gone wrong. She had promised herself she wouldn't end the same way. Somewhere over the Atlantic, as the sun began to slide toward the horizon, the cabin lights dimmed again. People pulled down their shades and drifted into sleep. The hum of the engines filled the silence. Anna stayed awake, staring at the faint reflection of her face in the glass. She didn't recognize it anymore. The captain received one last message before nightfall. Maintain heading. Fighter escort authorized to visual range upon U.S. airspace entry. Passenger 12F to be secured on landing. He read it quietly, then looked at his co-pilot. Secured, he said softly. Not met, secured. The co-pilot frowned. You think she's dangerous? The captain shook his head. If she was, we'd already know. My guess, she's not the problem. She's the proof. In seat 12F, Anna's eyes stayed open, fixed on the darkness outside. She didn't need to see the ground to know they were crossing into new territory. Her alias had done its job for months, but now it was a name that carried a signal. Somewhere below, men in command centers were watching her flight number, marking her seat. Somewhere else, the data she carried was already being hunted. She exhaled slowly and whispered to herself, barely loud enough to hear. Just make it to landing. Above the clouds, the 2 F-22s tightened their formation. Below them, the commercial jet kept its quiet, steady path through the night. None of the sleeping passengers knew that one woman, sitting by the window in seat 12F, was the reason a nation's defense system was on silent alert. She had no idea yet that the next few hours would decide whether she lived freely again or disappeared forever. The hours passed quietly, but the air inside the cabin had changed. The passengers didn't notice it, but Anna could feel it. A heaviness, the kind that comes when something important is about to happen. Outside, the world was dark now, the plane flying through an endless stretch of night sky. The soft blue light of the cabin made everyone look calm, unaware. She hadn't slept, not even for a minute. Every sound, every engine hum, every intercom click pulled her back to alertness. Years of training had taught her how to rest with her eyes open. But that night, she didn't even try. The envelope in her bag sat like a weight against her side, reminding her why she was here and what she had to lose. Somewhere ahead, over the horizon, was Washington. If she could make it there, she'd deliver what she carried and finally stop running. But deep down, she knew it wouldn't be that simple. In the cockpit, the pilots were still under strict radio silence. The two F-22s flew quietly beside them, invisible in the dark but steady on radar. The captain looked at the screen, shaking his head slowly. "Still with us," he muttered. "Like shadows," the co-pilot nodded. "They haven't said a word in over an hour. Means they're waiting for orders." Neither man spoke for a while after that. The cockpit lights were dim, the hum of instruments steady. The captain took a slow breath. "Whoever she is," he said quietly, "she's got the whole sky watching her." Back in the cabin, Anna's mind drifted to a memory she hadn't let herself think about in years. It was the sound of rain hitting glass in a small apartment window in Brussels. She had been sitting at her desk, surrounded by papers, her laptop open to encrypted messages. That was the night everything had gone wrong. She had been working for an intelligence unit, one that didn't officially exist. Their job was to trace cyber threats before they became real ones. Back then, she believed in it completely. The team was small, tight-knit, and careful. They thought they were saving people by finding cracks in digital defenses before enemies could. Then, one day, a message came through. It looked like a test signal, random code bouncing between satellites, but it wasn't. It was part of a new system, one she'd never seen before. She ran it through the filters, and what came out scared her. It wasn't a hack. It was an activation code. At first, she didn't believe it. Then she cross-checked the pattern against old classified files. What she found made her blood run cold. It matched a dormant defense protocol that had been abandoned years earlier, something called Project EOS. EOS had been designed to automate missile defense systems, allowing them to detect and respond to threats faster than any human. But during testing, it made a critical error. It flagged a friendly satellite as hostile. The system was shut down before it could do any damage, or so everyone had been told. When Anna dug deeper, she found signs that someone had reactivated it, secretly, quietly, using new satellites under civilian cover. The data was hidden in layers of fake weather reports and digital noise. It wasn't supposed to exist, but it did. And if EOS misread its signals again, it could trigger a response no one could stop. She had gone to her director immediately. He listened, nodded, and told her to delete everything. That was the first red flag. The second came 2 days later, when one of her teammates disappeared. His desk was cleared out, his credentials wiped from the system. A week after that, another went missing. No notice, no trace. Just gone. That was when Anna realized it wasn't an accident. Someone was protecting EOS, someone powerful. So she copied what she could, printed what mattered, and vanished. She'd left behind her ID, her apartment, her life. She became Anna Fields, a name pulled from an old travel form she'd once filled out. Now, after nearly 2 years in the shadows, the truth was in that envelope under her seat. Everything she'd uncovered, proof that EOS wasn't dead. Proof that someone had been feeding it false data to keep it running. She looked around the cabin. The passengers were half asleep. The hum of the engines was steady. It could have been any other night, any other flight. But she knew better. A soft voice came from the intercom, the captain. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin our descent in about 1 hour. Please fasten your seatbelts and prepare for landing." 1 hour. That was all she needed to hold out. But just then she saw something that made her sit a little straighter. Through the window, a sudden flash of light. Brief, sharp, almost like lightning, then another. Not natural. Too symmetrical. She glanced toward the front of the plane, but no one else seemed to notice. The passengers stayed calm. Only she knew what that pattern of light meant. Signal beacons. The military jets were adjusting formation. The F-22s were closing in. The captain got a new message in his headset. This is Eagle 1 to Flight 78. You are approaching secure airspace. Reduce speed to coordinate for guided entry. Confirm. He answered right away. Flight 78 confirmed. Copy. Do not deviate from assigned path. Repeat, do not deviate. Understood. The captain turned to his co-pilot. They're bringing us in under escort. That's military landing clearance. I've never seen that for a passenger flight. The co-pilot gave a nervous laugh. You think she's even aware? Oh, she's aware, the captain said quietly. People like that always are. Anna looked at the reflection of her own face in the glass, faint and pale. Her hands were steady, but her pulse wasn't. She had known this might happen. She had even planned for it in a way. But now that it was real, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Fear. Not the kind that made her panic. The kind that made her remember she was still human. The plane began its slow descent. The lights of the eastern coast appeared far below, soft and scattered. The city looked peaceful from up here, almost unreal. But she knew that in those lights were command centers and secure buildings where people were already preparing for her arrival. She glanced around again. A man across the aisle was still asleep, his headphones slipping off one ear. A young woman scrolled through photos on her phone. To them, this was just another routine landing. To Anna, it felt like the final stretch of a long, dangerous road. The flight attendants moved quietly through the aisle, collecting cups and trays. One of them stopped by Anna's seat and smiled. We'll be landing soon, she said softly. Anna nodded. Thank you. Her voice didn't tremble, but inside her thoughts were racing. She replayed everything, the mission, the files, the mistakes. She thought about the people who had trusted her, the ones who were gone now. She hoped it hadn't been for nothing. Then came another flash outside. The fighter jets were so close now she could see the faint outlines of their wings against the night. They moved with impossible precision, two silent guardians guiding the larger plane through the air. In the cockpit, the captain received his final transmission. Eagle 1 to Flight 78. You are cleared for priority landing at Washington National. Military escort will maintain visual until touchdown. Passenger 12F to be received immediately upon arrival. Confirm acknowledgement. Confirmed, the captain replied. He glanced at his co-pilot. It's official. Someone's waiting for her. Anna didn't know the details of that message, but she could feel it. The change in the plane's rhythm. The crew's quiet focus. The shift in the air. She looked down at the city lights getting closer. Her reflection merged with them in the window, one face fading into 1,000 tiny dots of light. She whispered under her breath, almost there. For a few seconds, she thought about what might happen next. Maybe they'd take her straight to a secure room. Maybe she'd never see the outside world again. But if the right person saw what was in that envelope, if the truth got out, then maybe it wouldn't matter. As the plane dropped lower, she could feel the tension in her shoulders ease just a little. She had made it farther than she'd expected. When the wheels finally touched the runway, the cabin filled with the familiar sound of landing, the squeal of tires, the hum of reverse thrust, the quiet applause from a few relieved passengers. To everyone else, it was just another smooth landing. To Anna, it was the sound of survival. But as the plane slowed and turned toward the gate, she noticed something unusual. Through the small round window by the emergency exit, she could see movement on the tarmac. Several dark vehicles unmarked parked near the hangar, a line of figures standing in formation. Her fingers brushed the envelope one last time. She didn't know who exactly was waiting for her down there, but she hoped they were the right ones. The captain's voice came over the intercom again, calm and warm. Welcome to Washington. We hope you enjoyed your flight. Anna gave a faint smile. It was almost funny in a way. Enjoyed wasn't the word she'd use. As the plane taxied to a stop, the lights outside grew brighter. The F-22s, their job done, banked away from view. The passengers began gathering their bags, stretching, chatting, but Anna stayed seated, waiting. She knew the moment the seatbelt sign turned off, everything would change. Her alias had protected her for nearly 2 years. But now, as she sat in seat 12F under the bright airport lights, she understood what that alias really meant. Not safety, but the thin line between being forgotten and being found, and tonight, she had finally been found. Didn't think much of it. Sometimes international flights parked further out, that's what they were told. The engines powered down slowly, leaving a soft hum in the air. People stretched, unbuckled their belts, and began collecting their things. But Anna stayed still in seat 12F, her hands resting on her bag. She could feel the air shift around her. Something in the way the flight attendants moved told her that this wasn't an ordinary landing. Their smiles were still there, but their eyes looked different. Watchful, careful. Through the small window, she could see several dark vehicles waiting on the tarmac, engines running, headlights off. A line of figures stood beside them, all wearing the same dark uniforms. Their presence was quiet but firm. She knew enough to recognize the type of formation. It wasn't airport security. The captain's voice came through the speaker, calm as ever. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Washington. For those continuing on connecting flights, please remain seated until we receive gate instructions." It was a gentle way of saying, "Stay where you are." The passengers didn't notice the tension under his words. They were too busy unzipping bags and talking about how smooth the flight had been. The man beside Anna stood, smiled politely, and reached for his coat. "You travel often?" he asked casually. She returned a small, polite smile. "Not anymore." He laughed softly, not realizing the truth in her tone. "Lucky you." When he turned away, she looked down at the envelope in her lap, running her thumb along the edge of the seal. It was still unbroken. That small red stamp on the corner felt heavier than ever. After a moment, one of the attendants spoke softly over the cabin intercom. "We ask that all passengers remain seated for a short delay. We appreciate your patience." Anna noticed that the crew members were now positioned strategically along the aisles, one near the front, one near the middle, one by the rear exit. They were calm, but their posture had changed. They weren't just waiting. They were waiting for someone. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw 2 figures board the plane through the front door. They weren't wearing airport uniforms. Their suits were dark, pressed, and plain. No visible badges, no names. They moved quietly down the aisle, scanning faces. The cabin had gone strangely silent. People began to whisper, wondering what was happening. The 2 stopped near row 12. One of them looked directly at her, then gave a small nod. The kind of nod that said, "We've found who we're looking for." The taller of the 2 leaned down and spoke softly. "Ms. Fields?" Anna met his eyes. "That's what it says on the ticket." He nodded once. "We'll need you to come with us. Please bring your belongings." There was no threat in his tone, but no room for argument either. The passengers nearby began to shift, pretending not to stare but unable to look away. A few exchanged curious glances. Someone whispered, "Is she in trouble?" Anna rose quietly, smoothing the front of her coat. "Of course," she said calmly. As she stood, the envelope slipped slightly from her bag. She caught it before it fell, pressing it close to her chest. The agent's eyes flicked toward it briefly, but he didn't ask. "Not yet." They guided her toward the front of the plane, walking slowly down the aisle. The other passengers' eyes followed her like a quiet wave of curiosity. When she reached the door, the captain stood waiting. He gave her a small, respectful nod. "Safe travels, ma'am." It wasn't something captains said to detained passengers. She understood what he meant. He knew she wasn't just anyone. Outside, the cold air hit her face. The night smelled of fuel and rain. The hum of engines filled the background as she was escorted down the mobile stairs. The ground lights reflected faintly off the wet tarmac. The dark vehicles waited just ahead. The closest one had its back door open. She could see the interior lights, dim, sterile. She hesitated for half a second, then climbed in. Inside, the air was warmer. The driver didn't turn to look at her. One of the men from the plane sat beside her, the other across from her. They were both quiet, professional. The car began to move. For several minutes, no one spoke. The silence stretched, filled only by the hum of the engine and the faint static of a radio somewhere in the front. Anna stared out the window at the blurred lights passing by. The airport faded behind them. Finally, the man beside her spoke. His tone was calm, measured. "You've been hard to find. I wasn't trying to be found, she replied. I can see that. He paused, studying her. You've caused a lot of people to lose sleep tonight. She gave a small, tired smile. Then it's a good thing I didn't get much sleep either. The man didn't react. We know who you are, he said after a moment. Or at least who you used to be. I don't use that name anymore. That's understandable. He gestured to the envelope. You carried that all the way here. What's inside? She looked down at it, tracing the edge with her finger. Something that shouldn't exist. His eyes narrowed slightly. And yet it does. That's why I'm here, she said quietly. He leaned back, watching her. You went dark for almost 2 years. Your clearance was revoked. Your files were sealed. People thought you were dead.
Why come back now?
Because someone restarted the system, she said. He exchanged a quick glance with the man across from him. You're talking about EOS. She looked at him sharply. So you do know. We know the rumors, he said carefully. But we also know that EOS was decommissioned. Officially, she shook her head. Official stories are just the clean versions. I have the data to prove it. Someone buried it under civilian satellite codes. If it isn't shut down, it could trigger responses that no human can override. He studied her for a long moment, then spoke into his radio. We're going to need immediate clearance at the secure wing. The car turned sharply, heading through a restricted gate. The lights grew brighter, the buildings more industrial. Anna could feel her pulse rise. She wasn't sure if she was being taken to safety or containment. When the car stopped, one of the men opened the door. We'll escort you inside. She stepped out into a wide, empty hangar. The sound of her footsteps echoed off the walls. A row of armed personnel stood at attention near the entrance to the building beyond. None of them spoke as she passed. Inside, the lighting was softer, but the air felt heavier. They led her through a series of long hallways until they reached a small room with a single table and 2 chairs. Please wait here, the taller man said. He didn't lock the door, but the message was clear. Don't leave. She sat down, setting the envelope on the table. Her reflection glimmered faintly on the polished surface. After a few minutes, the door opened again. A man in a dark suit entered, older, with gray hair and a calm, authoritative presence. He closed the door behind him and sat across from her. I've been told you brought something important, he said. I did, she replied, and I need to make sure it reaches the right hands. He nodded slightly. You've already caused quite a stir. Fighter escorts, secure landing, emergency protocols. That's not something we see often from a single passenger. I didn't plan it that way. He folded his hands on the table. Then how should we understand it? Anna pushed the envelope toward him. Read it and you'll understand. He studied her for a moment before taking it. He broke the seal, unfolded the papers, and began to read. The only sound in the room was the faint hum of the air vent. His expression didn't change, but she could see the tension building in his shoulders as his eyes moved across the page. When he finally looked up, his voice was quieter. Is this real? Yes, and verified. 3 times. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. If this is true, it changes everything. That's why I came back, she said softly. For a moment, he just sat there staring at the papers. Then he stood, gathering them carefully. You did the right thing bringing this here, he said. But you need to understand, you won't be able to disappear again. I wasn't planning to, she said. He gave her a long, thoughtful look. You've just saved a lot of people from something they'll never even know about. I didn't do it for them, she said quietly. I did it for the ones who tried to stop it and couldn't. He nodded once. Get her something to eat, he said to the guard outside the door. She's earned it. As he left, Anna sat back in her chair, feeling the first wave of real exhaustion crash over her. The long years of running, hiding, and fear had finally come to this. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to breathe. Outside, the night was still and quiet. The F-22s that had escorted her were returning to base, their mission complete. The pilots didn't know who they'd protected, only that the order had come from the highest level. But somewhere in their reports, in the small notes written after landing, they all mentioned the same thing, that the passenger in seat 12F had made the sky stand at attention. And though most of the world would never know her name, the people who did would never forget it. The night after the landing was long and silent. Inside the government facility, the fluorescent lights stayed on, reflecting off the gray floors. The woman who had once gone by the name Anna Fields sat alone in a small room with no windows, a cup of untouched tea in front of her. Her coat hung on the back of the chair, damp from the rain outside. She could still hear the faint hum of distant engines and the low voices of people walking past the hallway. It had been hours since she'd handed over the envelope. The people who took it had disappeared into another room, leaving her to wait. She didn't mind the silence. She'd lived in silence for years. Waiting was part of her old life, and it came back to her easily. At some point, a woman entered with a tray of food and set it down gently. "You should eat something," she said softly. "I will," Anna replied, though she didn't move. The woman hesitated. "You did something important tonight," Anna gave a faint smile. "We'll see if they think so." The woman nodded slightly and left. Minutes turned into hours. Somewhere down the hall, a door opened, and the man from earlier, the one who had read her papers, returned. His face looked tired but calm. He took the chair across from her and placed a folder on the table. "It's confirmed," he said quietly. "Everything you brought was real. The system was active again. We shut it down an hour ago." Anna exhaled, the first real breath she'd taken in days. "You did it fast." "We didn't have a choice," he said. "If the wrong signal had gone through, we would have been facing chaos by morning." She nodded. "That's what I was afraid of." He looked at her carefully. "You could have stayed hidden. You knew what coming here would mean." "I couldn't risk it being ignored," she said. "The wrong people already knew I was alive. If I didn't deliver it myself, no one would have believed it." He nodded slowly. "You took a big risk. You understand what happens next, don't you?" "I imagine I won't be catching another flight anytime soon," she said with a small smile. He didn't smile back. "We'll have to move you somewhere secure for now. There are people who'll want to know where you've been all this time, and not all of them will ask nicely." "I'm used to that," she said quietly. He studied her face for a moment, as if trying to see past the calm expression she wore. Then he closed the folder. "I'll make sure your work gets credit even if your name doesn't." "I didn't do it for credit," she said. "I just wanted to stop it before it started again." He stood and straightened his jacket. "You stopped more than you realize." When he left, the door clicked softly shut. Anna sat still for a while, staring at the small cup of tea. The steam had faded, but she took a sip anyway. It tasted faintly of mint and something else, something almost like peace. Later, they moved her to a quiet residential compound outside the city. It wasn't a prison, but it wasn't freedom either. The walls were high and the rooms were simple. She didn't mind. After years of hiding in unfamiliar countries and sleeping in rented rooms, this place at least felt safe every few days. Someone new came to speak with her. Analysts, officers, people in suits who asked questions carefully but never pushed too far. They wanted to know how she found the data, who had given it to her, what else she might know. She answered what she could and ignored what she didn't trust. She never asked for much. Just a small radio, a notebook, and a view of the sky. Sometimes she'd step outside at night and watch the faint lines of planes passing overhead. She'd wonder if anyone on those flights ever thought about the people who made sure the world kept turning quietly, safely, without them ever noticing. One evening, weeks after her arrival, a young officer came to deliver a sealed folder. "They said you should see this," he told her, handing it over. Inside were several reports, official summaries of what had happened. Pages filled with terms she understood too well. System override, unauthorized sequence, classified protocol termination. But near the end, one small section caught her eye. Subject Operation EOS. Status neutralized. Source classified operative Seat 12F. She stared at those two words. Seat 12F, that's all she was to the report. Not her name, not her history, just a seat number. It made her smile. Maybe that was better. Maybe being anonymous again was the closest thing to peace she'd ever have. The next morning, she woke early to the sound of faint engines in the distance. She stepped outside and saw two aircraft streaking across the dawn sky. The same kind of F-22s that had followed her flight that night. They caught the sunlight, gleaming silver and quiet. She raised her hand slightly, almost like a wave. Down at the airbase, one of the pilots glanced at the radar feed and noticed her small signal on the edge of the field. He didn't know who she was, but he remembered the story. The mysterious passenger whose presence had turned a regular escort into an official salute. He tapped the glass of the cockpit once, then tilted his jet slightly, dipping the wings. It was subtle. No one else noticed. But she did. It was their way of saying they remembered. Months passed. The incident faded from the news cycle, replaced by new stories, new worries. But somewhere inside a quiet Pentagon office, a locked drawer held the original envelope, still marked with that same red seal. A note was attached. Delivered by hand, priority clearance level 1. Only a few people knew what was inside. Fewer still knew who had delivered it. In time, even those who knew began to retire, move on, or forget. But legends have a strange way of staying alive, even when names fade. One of the flight attendants from that night still told the story sometimes when she met new crew members. She never exaggerated it, but there was always that spark in her eyes when she described how calm the woman in seat 12F had been, how she hadn't shown a trace of fear, even when the fighter jets appeared beside them. She looked like she knew something we didn't, the attendant would say, like she'd seen too much of the world and decided to come back only when it mattered. No one could find her name on the passenger list anymore. It had been erased, replaced with a code. But everyone on that flight remembered the moment the F-22s dipped their wings before landing. Years later, a journalist wrote a small piece about the event. It wasn't front-page news, just a short column buried in a Sunday edition. The headline read, "The Ghost in Seat 12F." The article didn't mention her name or the real reason for the escort. It simply described how one passenger had triggered a salute from the world's most advanced fighter pilots. The piece ended with a single line. Some people don't need recognition to make history. When Anna, now living quietly under another name in a quiet coastal town, saw the story, she folded the newspaper neatly and set it aside. She didn't need to read it twice. She spent her days walking along the beach, painting small sketches of the sky, and sometimes sitting at a cafe where no one knew her past. Life had become simple again. She never told anyone what had happened or what she'd done. Some truths didn't belong in stories, they belonged in silence. Every now and then, when she saw a plane passing high above the ocean, she'd pause and look up. For a moment, she'd remember that long night in the sky, the nervous crew, the flashing lights, and the quiet salute from two unseen pilots. She'd smile faintly and whisper to herself, "Seat 12F." No one ever came looking for her again. The system she'd helped shut down never reactivated. Her work had done what it was meant to do, keep the world safe, quietly, without anyone ever knowing how close it had come to danger. And maybe that was enough. Far away, in a training hall for new Air Force pilots, one instructor liked to tell a story before takeoff. Once, he'd say, there was a flight that carried someone the world thought was gone. No one knew who she was. But when the jets found out they didn't see an enemy or a stranger, they saw someone who had already done her duty. So they saluted. The younger pilots would smile, thinking it was just a myth, but the older ones knew better. Because every time they saw a passenger jet gliding through the sky, they remembered that quiet salute, the night when the world paused for someone who never asked to be remembered. And in that silence, somewhere between the clouds and the stars, the ghost of Seat 12F still flew quietly on, watching, waiting, and keeping her last promise.